delighted to be joined by Ron Kalifa. The focus is obviously on the FinTech sector review. I'm Stephen Ingledew. Many of you I know as the Exec Chair of FinTech Scotland. We're going to have a conversation with Ron about the review that came out a couple of weeks ago now. We'll then have a few words from Kent Mackenzie from Deloitte just about sort of Scotland as a cluster and some of the lessons we can learn moving forward. Of course, then hear from Nicola, Chief Executive of FinTech Scotland, and then we've invited a couple of the very exciting firms from our community here in Scotland, from the east, from Edinburgh, Nick from Zumo Money, and from the west, Pardeep from Access Fintech, really to be invited onto a panel. We'll ask you to stay on mute if you don't mind, to reduce the noise level. We will looking to allow about half an hour for your questions. So please, any questions you've got, put them into the chat box there that you'll see up on the icons there if you want to raise anything, and we'll put those questions out as we go through. So without further ado, a big welcome, Ron, to Scotland from a virtual point of view. Maybe say at the start, really a big thank you for your time, but a big thank you really for, if I may say at the start, on behalf of the community here in Scotland, for what you've been doing in champion in the whole sort of FinTech sector, the FinTech movement. We've had terrific feedback from the review that came out a couple of weeks ago. People feel that actually it's very much now much more of the agenda, and that's down to your leadership and engagement through this, really. So so a big thank you really from the start. It means a lot to us here in terms of what we're taking forward, and very much aligned in terms of what you are putting forward. So Ryan, I'd like to start off actually in terms of, if I may ask, just about yourself and personally, really. I mean, when you embarked on your career, which I know has been illustrious, and many people will know you because of Worldpay and the great success, one of the early pioneering successful fintechs. Did you ever envisage being part of this FinTech sector, FinTech movement, when you started your career and the journey you've been on?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you, and really good, and thank you for the warm welcome, and importantly, thank you all for joining as well. It's a delight, particularly to hear about the snow up in Scotland and the kind of the gust there. I was there in the summer, just as a quick aside, and that's the only time I've been away from home, as it were, in terms of a summer holiday. And I have to say, it was just sparkling, as it always is. Anyway, let me come back to FinTech, because it's what we're here for. No, I don't think anyone had heard of the word FinTech, if I'm really honest. And I started to, when the word was started to be expressed, and it used to be, and I think it's still got a bit of a bad reputation, because people tend to think about this as, you know, a couple of people in a small coffee shop in some cool town, playing on an iPad to try and create and having a dream about how they're going to grow their business, and more importantly, how they're going to become billionaires on the back of it. It really isn't that, as many of you know. It's actually about hard work. It's about customers. It's about real solutions that you're finding. But Worldpay was an interesting journey. I touched Worldpay first in 2002, when it was a 7 million loss-making company with 75 people down in Cambridge. Through one twist and turn and another, and several years of hard work, as you'll all know, it became something significant, something big. And today, it's got a market cap of about $80 billion and got about 60,000 people employed, because it's now part of a different organization. So it's been a fantastic journey, and one where I've learned a lot. But I used to talk about Worldpay as being the poster child for FinTech, to try and get it to become, seen as a cool thing. Now people talk about it as a legacy organization. It's quite interesting how the world moves on, really. So, but that's not a bad thing. I mean, I'd like to hope and be in a position, Stephen, where we get to a place where we don't need to talk about FinTech, but we talk about financial services, because that really is when you can tell that the system and the process and the sector has matured, and how people respect and respond to it.
But yeah, that's interesting, Mark. Maybe we'll come back to that a bit later on. And also, obviously, your experience of, well, I know obviously you work for a large institution like NatWest RBS, but also then scaling. And there's a lot of talk about scaling enterprises, fintech enterprises, and maybe we'll come back to that in a moment. But maybe to start, just your take as a starting context with it, your take on the fintech sector in the UK.
So we've got a leadership position. I think we've got a position which is envied around the world. And as many of you will know, we have got a 10% global market share. It's worth about £11 billion in revenue today, and it's growing threefold over the next 10 years. So, and that's on a conservative basis. But I think the opportunity for the UK is much bigger than that, because fintech is frankly as close to the broader tech sector as it is to the financial services sector. And it's interesting, when I've talked to people, they don't tend to align themselves with being part of financial services. They think of themselves as being part of the tech sector. And it'd be interesting to get a sense of how others on this call think about that as well. But it provides a pivotal point for us to combine all three: fintech, technology, and financial services. And I think we can combine all three to develop a platform that I think few competitors can match globally. There's a massive opportunity for the UK to lead on this sector because we're already seen as having that leadership position. It's interesting, as I've talked to different countries, whether it's Australia, France, Canada, UAE, Singapore, and I've asked them the question consistently, what is it that you are doing in fintech? And they all say exactly the same thing, which is, well, we tend to watch what you guys are doing in the UK and we copy it. And it's quite interesting. I was looking at some analysis the other day in terms of how far the report has been reported in terms of geographies. It's been reported in so many countries that you just wouldn't have thought about: Argentina, Mexico, Japan, Australia, India, Alaska. You think the vibrant sector in Alaska on fintech is just staggering. But I think there is a significant opportunity. The other side of it is that you've got to remember that if you use my definition of financial services in the broader sense, because they all think of themselves as fintech organizations, there are over 1 million people employed in financial services. And the influence of fintech, I think, is an opportunity to grow, to upskill, and frankly, future-proof employment in the sector. We're only second to the US in terms of investment into fintech. And if you control for market size, where they're equal, UK Financial Services themselves invested 95 billion in 2019 in technology. And investment in UK fintech stood at $4.1 billion last year. And when you compare that to the level of investment across the rest of Europe, that level of investment, 4.1 billion, was actually more than the next 4 European countries combined. Germany was next at sort of 1.4 billion. So I think we're starting in a very positive and a very significant way, because all the factors are there. Fintech is no longer, thankfully, just about startups in London. And I think this sector can be known as the one that supports scale-ups, particularly on the back of the pandemic. Because scale basically means widespread adoption. The UK's adoption rate is already at 70%, which is significantly higher than the US at 46%. So I think it's a very, very positive environment that we're operating in at the moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Ron. And I think, again, as I said at the start, I think we've got a real sense this last couple of weeks how you very much put fintech on that main agenda. And in fact, it's interesting, if you look at your first few words in the report, the 100-page, really quite compelling read report, there's that refer to fintech no longer being a niche. And I think it's exactly what it's saying. So with that backdrop then, that is 12 months ago was when it was announced that you were going to be carrying out this independent review on behalf of the Treasury. Do you want to just talk us through that starting point and then how it's evolved to the report that we saw a couple of weeks ago?
Sure, thanks. So, you can imagine you get a phone call saying, we want to do a review on fintech and we'd love some help on it. And you typically think that they're going to ask you some questions to say, well, what's the sort of things to cover, etc. And then the next sentence says, would you like to put it together? And that's a bit of a shock to the system, because I don't think, if I'm really honest, I knew what I was taking on in terms of time and energy and effort. It's taken a year. And then in the midst of that, we've had the pandemic. And frankly, also I've had some personal challenges in terms of my father passed away on the back of the pandemic. And it was just, it was a real blow to me, literally last March. So it was about 2 weeks after the Chancellor asked me to do it. And I thought, oh no, I can't bother to do this. It's too much going on in my life. But I'm glad I did. I mean, I'm truly glad I did, because of the way that I've tried to approach it is not to think about it as a report on a set of recommendations, but more so as a strategy with a delivery model in terms of how this sector can be embraced and how it can go forward. And I've looked at it through, as many of you will know, through 5 lenses. I looked at it through skills and talent, through investment, through levelling up. And I'll come back to levelling up, because I do think that's a really important part of the future, policy and international competitiveness and attractiveness. And the reason I went for those is that they're almost at the cornerstone of what we're trying to address as a nation. It's about jobs, it's about inclusion, it's about international trade, it's about levelling up, it's about innovation. That's at the heart of what this sector presents and creates that opportunity for. So apart from the sort of initial gulp of, goodness, what am I going to do? It's been a year's work to get us to where we are.
Yes, and a year's work. So here we are, that sort of 12 months on, and I think what's really sort of struck people was the clarity around the 5 sections, but then the sort of the 15 very specific, I suppose, actions to take forward. And on that, and maybe you want to particularly focus on the national connectivity aspect here, Ron, is that what's been that sort of, I suppose maybe people are interested initially, what's been the reaction from government, and obviously you've had a conversation with various ministers on the report that's come out that we've all read through?
Yeah, well, look, I think overall the industry has responded really well. Policymakers seem to have responded well. Government has responded well. They've already announced, for example, the tech visas, as you'll have seen. They've talked about the activities as it relates to listings, which has been reinforced by Jonathan Hill's report as well, Lord Hill's report, which came out a few days after mine. So I think people have embraced it, but it's a bit like writing a letter to Santa, is the way I describe it. You write a letter to Santa, it goes in, and then you really have to wait till Christmas Day to see what the presents are going to be like, and if you get any presents as well, actually. I sense that the Chancellor's excited about it. This is a sector he understands. He comes from the financial services background, as many of you know. And today, I think we're in a place where not just am I waiting for their response, which will come, but the reality is that I think it will be embraced in terms of it is an opportunity to sort of look at the broadest aspect of financial services. And I think yesterday, there were some announcements by John Glenn, who's the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, who's been incredibly supportive about the work. They are looking at the financial services sector on a holistic basis to say, well, what is it that's going on, and actually what needs to be changed, what needs to be looked at. So I think in simple terms, it's been well received, but we'll know more when the presents turn up on, let's call it Christmas Day.
Yes, and I guess that analogy, because in a way, to some extent, maybe is there some aspect here about it's not just about taking the presents, if there are to be any, it's more about probably thinking what can we give on that proactive. And I suppose that's where, is there much more that can be done from collectively as an industry, UK wide, Scotland, in terms of giving, particularly in that aspect that maybe I touched on, a slightly alongside issue we touched on was around scale. How do we help businesses really to scale up?
Yeah, that's fair. Stephen, look, I think the way I tried to do a report is government's busy at the moment, and it's going to be busy for the next several years, just given what's going on in the world. So I've tried to create a model where basically I'm not asking for government to do too much. There's probably about 20–30% of the review or the recommendations require government to do certain things. It might be regulatory activity, it might be about convening principally, or removing some obstacles. But the majority of the work needs to be done in the private sector. And frankly, I think FinTech Scotland is a fantastic model. I think what you and others have done there is a tremendous base case And I've talked about this in terms of how industry needs to organise itself, because industry hasn't organised itself particularly well. They've organised themselves as well as they could with very well-intentioned people, whether it's the envoys or whether it's kind of organisations such as yours. But there are something like 28 different organisations up and down the country, throughout the UK, who are trying to move the needle in terms of fintech. So one of the things that I've suggested is that there is a new entity that is set up, which is the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure, but in very simple terms, it is the convening group that needs to be mandated by government. So that's what I would hope happens, which allows CFIT, as it would be, Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology, to start to think about how do we increase the fintech adoption rate? How do we increase the percentage of SMEs that are making use of external finance? How do we grow the number of unicorns that are available in the UK? How do we increase the number of listings in terms of on the stock exchange? Because the numbers are actually quite miserable when you compare them to other sectors and other markets. You'll be familiar that there were 3,300 listings or so across the globe in terms of the world's major exchanges, and just under 40% were in the States. The UK had just under 5%. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, but scaling capital, to your earlier point, is a really important part of it. And we've got to find a way to potentially create what I've suggested is a growth fund that gets invested in, because there's a £2 billion growth funding gap, capital funding gap in the UK for this sector. So wouldn't it be great if we could direct something in the region of 1 billion and create a new growth fund for this sector? And that would require not the government doing anything apart from convening and helping us to clear the way, but also to look at some of the regulatory obstacles that prevent today our domestic insurers and pension funds from investing in growth companies. There's a series of obstacles that are being looked at in terms of pension funds, DC pensions, but that's not the only place to go. It could be DC, it could be DB, but it could actually be the insurance industry itself. So that's some of the things that I think need to be cleared, and government can help to do that. The other one is about creating a scale box. Yeah. And a scale box is basically a mechanism to help the FCA help entities who have not only just done well through the startup process, but actually who get the scale up process and think, well, how does the regulator help me understand some of the things that I need to work through? How do I create partnerships that work better? So that's another recommendation, which I think is going to be embraced as well. Yeah. So there's a lot in these things, as you know.
Yes, absolutely right. And just one sort of final sort of thing on that. So, and obviously, yeah, in Scotland, we've got a vibrancy around new startups, but a few examples of those that are scaled, FNZ probably being the most notable, really. But maybe it's that sometimes I feel actually to scale, and particularly from a capital, you need to be in London. And that, I suppose, is back to this sort of scale levelling up. London's clearly really important. We all benefit from a thriving London centre. But I suppose this is the other point you're drawing out about actually this doesn't just have to be in London in terms of the way we develop the levelling up. Is that fair?
Yeah, Stephen, look, I think without a shadow of a doubt, I'm sure there are a bunch of fintechs in London, but there are a significant number outside of London. And I know some of them up in Scotland rather well. So the capital in terms of London is a super hub, sure, no question of that. But what we've done is we've actually identified 10 high growth clusters that are at different levels of maturity. So high growth fintech across the UK tends to be underpinned by proximity to some very core foundational capabilities. The first one is that there's typically existing financial services and technology domain expertise. Scotland's got that in abundance in terms of RBS, Aberdeen, etc. There's a lot of businesses that are there. There's at least 3 higher educational establishments in the cluster area, and you've got that with it in significant numbers as well. And there are at least 3 or more fintech accelerators. So across the country, there were actually 25 clusters of fintech activity that were identified. And those clusters, as I said, were at different stages of growth and development. And a deeper analysis that we did, which was actually done fantastically well by Deloitte, who I have to say were just stellar to work with in terms of this. And they produced a model which identified that there are 10 clusters that are already producing high growth, and they're category defining clusters or fintechs. And these clusters are spread across the UK and frankly have the strongest potential for growth and development of globally competitive fintech and tech fin excellence. Yeah. And I emphasize the word tech fin because the sort of the way to think about the review is it's not just about fintech, but actually the common factors are significant. They tend to be fast growth activities. So you can almost read all of the recommendations in that way, that it's not just about financial services. These things will apply to others. So we've identified these 10 areas, clusters. Scotland is clearly one of them. And it's one of the more significant ones. So it's large and it's established alongside the Pennines and Birmingham. And Scotland has benefited from a strong professional coordinating body, which I think FinTech Scotland has made a tremendous difference with participation from both the public and the private sector. And that's a little bit of what CFIT needs to try and do to build on a national scale.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Ron, we're going to come back actually, but on that note, I'm going to actually ask Kent from Deloitte, obviously very much involved with the Deloitte team in terms of that data-driven analysis, really. Just pick up a couple of things. We'll come back to you along with some of the questions. But Kent, I've got a couple of questions for you over a minute or so. First of all, what's your take on, just picking up what we're saying about the key to Scotland's success?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for asking me to come on today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I guess the last 5 years to work through how we support and scale and grow the cluster. Ron picked up on some very specific points here that have, they demonstrate the hallmark of why and how Scotland's been so successful. So, of course, the educational hubs that we have, the educational institutions that do such a wonderful job in that next generation of talent coming through, the accelerators, the code bases, the data labs, the code plans, so on, hugely influential in the success that we've had, and of course a very well established FS and indeed tech heritage. I was chatting to Ron the other day about the anecdote I love when I talk about Scotland effectively being the pioneers of fintech, given that the ATM was invented here back in the, I think, 60s or early 70s. So these things are, the sort of foundations. I think one point I would make is that when you watch the connectivity and the proximity of these things and how they work together in Scotland, it's really quite staggering. There are many examples of where that collaboration has been successful, has nurtured and grown and really breathed life into fintech that I think makes a difference. So it's one thing having them, it's another thing connecting them. I guess the privileged position that we've had over the last 5 years has allowed me to almost just watch some really kind of unspoken things as well play out through the growth of this cluster. And there were 5 things I wrote down over breakfast this morning that I wanted to share that I think are absolute hallmarks in Scotland's success. I'll just share them with you quickly and then pause, Stephen, and we can take any thoughts or questions. So firstly, I think there's something about the recognition and the respect that each constituent part of this ecosystem has had for each other that's a massive differentiator. So recognizing it's only when we play together and play together well that we are truly successful has been a huge part of that success. So respecting that there are 7-8 different parts of this ecosystem that all need to come together and work together is really key to our success. I think the second thing that is I wanted to call out, and I remember having many conversations about this in the early days about that lightning rod, having a passion and a focus and a resilience in getting the job done here and growing the cluster has been really critical to success. And Stephen, you've epitomized that more laterally, and a number of others sort of formally when things started in 2016 have really made a huge difference. The third thing that I would call out here is this passion and commitment to grassroots and skills, and recognizing that the lifeblood of this cluster is in nurturing and growing and encouraging and putting an arm around the skills that are so important to growing it. So really, really critical. Couple of final points. I guess penultimate one, zeroing in on where we can truly be successful, I think has been a key to the success of this cluster. So not gilding the lily across absolutely everything and being all things to all women and men, but really zeroing in on where Scotland can thrive. You know, you look at payments, you look at wealth, you look at reg tech, and of course data and the great work that places like GovCo and so on and so forth are doing. I think that absolute focus on where we can win, I think has been a differentiator. And then last but by no means least, the point that I started on here is you only really truly, I think, achieve the success Scotland has when you find that connectivity, you find and you nurture that connective tissue between all of these things. That's when the rising tide raises all ships. So those would be my thoughts, I guess, on the absolutes, but then also just some of the important nuances that I've learned and seen and had the privilege of being involved in the last 5 years.
No, thank you, Ken. And I think we may come back on that. And it's very kind words in terms of the. I really emphasise journey. I think I said to Ron and particularly the team at part of the chapters of the review, really don't think that Scotland's got this all right or all worked out. We've made some mistakes along the way and still some bumpy stuff, and there will be fintechs with us now this morning actually who are still going through some difficult, tough times we're trying to work through. So on that, I'd like to just bring in Nicola actually, because Nicola, as now the Chief Executive of FinTech Scotland, that next stage of this journey, in terms of how you think really building on the review and what's laid out at the moment, what are a couple of things you can draw up where you think we can move on and act to take us to the next level?
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks everyone. It's great to be part of this conversation today and really excited about the next chapter and the opportunity here that we have in Scotland for FinTech for sure. We're focusing on how we strengthen that sector and those foundations, and how we go from established to super is very firmly in our sights as we think about that. And some examples that I'm going to draw on are really focusing on that support for the SME community sitting at its heart, really focusing on the needs of those businesses. And we think about those opportunities that they need to be able to grow and to be able to scale. And we will work with Scottish Enterprise and the outcome of the Mark Logan report as we really think about that scale-up opportunity in particular. Investing in experiences and talent and sharing that, really building on the strength of the community and thinking about those opportunities to learn from each other, to grow, to scale and to progress. And that in turn then helps to strengthen the other businesses that are coming on. We'll be really focused on that route to commercialisation and route to market. So those really strong relationships with the financial services organisations and indeed beyond, as we think about FinTech moving beyond financial services and that horizontal opportunity really, and thinking about the application more broadly in the digital economy. So route to commercialisation is key to us. And how do we take that cluster as we think about levelling up across the UK? How do we think about levelling up across Scotland and really building on that strength across into Dundee and more broadly into some of the other regions of Scotland? So really working with Scottish Enterprise on all of that, and we think about the outcomes from the Mark Logan report. But we're not going to stop there, Stephen, you'll be pleased to hear. There's another huge focus for us is around internationalization and building that connectivity across the world as we think about Scotland and the UK and the opportunities that we have globally. So working with Scottish Development, Scottish SDI, DIT and Innovate Finance as we think about those bridges that we want to strengthen. So that's another key part of our strategy for the year ahead. And the final point that I'll touch on here is that opportunity to really take FinTech and consider the next generation So we've been doing some fantastic work with Innovate UK and thinking about research and innovation in this sector and within this subject. We're delighted to support the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence and the establishment there, and seeing that grow from strength to strength, and perhaps think about the opportunity that has from an innovations perspective to support some of those recommendations, Ron, from the review and the sandbox in particular, as well as what other research and innovation do we need to think about, and how do we support that more fully. So those are top of mind, Stephen, at the moment.
Thank you, Nicola. And before I come, actually, we've invited a couple of our fintech entrepreneurs on with us, really. Ron, do you mind if I just come back to you and whether you have any reflections of what you've heard there from Nicola and Kent about Scotland? And we're always interested to get that view looking in, and obviously you know Scotland, and about any sort of perspective on what you've heard there.
Look, I think Nicola's characterised it really well, and the reality is that we have got an opportunity, and I don't think you recognise how much you've achieved in Scotland, actually, because in many ways, as I've talked to other parts of the country, everyone points to Scotland and says, they're a little bit jealous. I mean, that's being polite, if I'm honest, or envious, whichever way you want to look at it. But you've had a force, you've had a kind of a mechanism to drive things forward, and that is what makes the difference. So really, I think there will be many lessons for CFIT. And in fact, I was talking to someone yesterday as we think about, how do we set CFIT up? What do we need to go and tell the government about? How do we get it moving? That I think there are many aspects of or lessons to be learned in terms of. So I can't add much because I think you have done more for the fintech sector than you probably realise in terms of how do we build on what's been done already. You've got an organisation, you've had funding. That's been a big aspect of it. You've had a devolved government that's been willing to put money into this, whereas that hasn't happened in other parts of the country. That makes a material difference. So what I'm looking for is to get some seed funding to get CFIT established, to have clear governance where FinTech Scotland would have to be represented, because I think it would benefit the organisation on a broader level. But importantly, we'd actually start to create the model and the template for what we start working on going forward.
Yeah.
It won't be easy, and I don't want to make it sound like it will be easy, because this is pioneering stuff in many ways. But at the heart of it, we've got to just inch this thing forward. I hope that helps. I think congratulations is all I can add to what you've already done.
Right, thank you, Ron. I think I would add, though, not just about the journey, but we're quite keen. We feel we learn by actually sharing, and therefore we're very keen, actually, on behalf of the community and everyone, to be part of the bigger team, because we feel not only can we contribute, we will get some value back by being part of that bigger team. So yeah, we'd be delighted to be contributing in. Maybe there might be some questions on CFIT, but maybe I'd take a slightly different track and actually hear really from those actually at the cold face on fintech, really. And maybe Par, can I come to you really, and just a snapshot about yourself and Access Fintech, because you've only been with us now for what, 18 months?
Yeah, so hi, my name's Par and I'm the head of financial products at Access Fintech. My background is actually finance, so thinking about what Ron said earlier, where you kind of have this hybrid model, do we move more into the technology space or more into the finance space? When I look at our organisation, we have true technologists who have never stepped foot inside a bank, and they come up against me, and my whole working background was in investment services. But I think that's part of the beauty of it. We are a global organisation, so we were founded in 2016, and we've got offices across Tel Aviv, across New York, London, and in February of last year opened a Glasgow location, which I was absolutely delighted to do. And we've seen really rapid growth up here. So I think we've gone from just me, I think in January last year, to 11 of us at the moment. And a real hybrid of roles. So we've got relationship managers, you've got people like me who design how operationally things are going to work, but actually front end and back end developers now joining the team as well. So we're managing to bring into this one organisation all of these different skills and all of the talent that we have to offer across Scotland.
And I had the privilege of meeting the founders of, obviously back 18 months ago, of Access Fintech over from New York. And I think they've also grown in their love of Glasgow. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. So I think the story that I like to tell, because it frustrates them, is when I joined, we didn't really talk about location, and I'm a West Coast of Scotland girl and had no intention of moving. Spent a bit of time in London and got asked if I was selling my house yet. And I said, well, I'm not really intending to sell my house. Why would I do that? And they were like, well, are you going to stay in Scotland? It's like, yeah, I think I'll stay in Scotland. And in the 18 months that I've been with the organisation, we've gone from, are you selling your house and moving to London, to a really committed approach to our growth in this location. So for me, that's great. But I think for what we're doing locally, the way in which FinTech Scotland has brought us together with other FinTech organisations, and the support that we as a business are getting up here, I think is remarkable.
Thank you, Pat. It's always much better when you can walk to work rather than fly to work, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Better for the carbon footprint as well.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I was. And right, thank you, Pat. Let's move on to Nick, as a homegrown entrepreneur, if you don't mind me saying, Nick, and a recent television star on ITV News this week. But Nick, just give us your background and Zumo Money.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thanks, Stephen. Well, I definitely probably the opposite background to Pa, and that I'm an outsider on the financial services world. Although I've spent the last 20 years in tech in various different guises, and come by a fairly roundabout route to having a fintech business that's grounded in blockchain and cryptocurrency, really driven by curiosity and always wanting to be involved in what I kind of judged as being something that was going to move the game on for people globally. So I was kind of lucky to be around right at the start of commercial web as the dot-com bubble was bursting, and to work in that space at the time, just super exciting. And I think that for me, the blockchain space, now just about beginning to start realizing its potential, has the same scope to change the world as the kind of the internet has done, and in a pretty fundamental way, and particularly in financial services, with the kind of middleman removal piece, which is going to shake things up massively. Really interesting question from Daniel on the chat around CBDCs that I mentioned there. You know, it's a fascinating time to be involved. I'm not a maths guy, I'm not a scientist, I'm actually a historian. I'm a Glasgow Uni alumni, so as well from my background, and I find the sweep of it is fascinating. My business partner Paul looks after the product, but yeah, super interesting time to be involved. Fascinating macro for us at the moment, in that probably the crypto space has had a kind of 5-year fast forward due to the pandemic, both in terms of people thinking about cashless and some basic stuff like, you know, people having a lot more time on their hands at home and looking at different types of products. You know, the whole initial Satoshi vision around an alternative to kind of central bank money printing suddenly seems quite real, and something that's becoming quite relevant for educated people looking at that. You know, looking at the world we've moved on. So we've had this really fascinating fast forward. I have this really basic kind of litmus test, because when we started the business in 2017, everyone thought we were mad and said, you know, it's all a scam, or that's just for the dark web, or Bitcoin will go to zero in the next year and won't be involved in anything. And that sort of vaguely moved over time. And I would say, yeah, probably a year ago, that was still half people's reaction. When I talk to anybody about Zumo now and what we're doing, they almost always say one of two things, which is they tell you their story about how they've just bought their first crypto or something along those lines, or they ask you if now's the right time to get into the space. So it's a fascinating time to be involved. We took a gamble that the next big recessionary event would drive the next big wave of adoption. You know, as the kind of creation of Bitcoin was a reaction to 2008, and that's what we're seeing right now. They obviously couldn't and wouldn't want to have foreseen the circumstances, but yeah, it's a very interesting time to be involved, and the types of institution that we're in dialogue with is mind-blowing to me now, considering where the space was 3 years ago. So yeah, it's super interesting right at the very start. It's the fun and exciting bit, and I think Scotland for us is a great place to be from a talent point of view. All of our front end mobile app team is all based in Edinburgh, albeit our back end team is all based in Slovenia, and then we're increasingly hiring people from all over the UK. We've actually got a new head of product who's moving back from Berlin to live in Bristol and work for us remotely in Bristol. So I think we now live in this connected, ever more kind of connected world where those physical barriers have come down, and we have access. Feels like we have access to people that we probably wouldn't have done before, because there's a limited population supply in Scotland, and there's lots of talented people, but there's lots of people also doing good ideas, and the kind of the Hoover of London drawing people down there as well, which actually I think has probably been lessened. So yeah, fascinating times. It's great to see the focus on the FinTech hub. I mean, I think as you would expect a founder like myself to say, what we need is more availability of capital. It's far too concentrated on London, at Series A, B, C, D, and E, and that's the bit that needs fixing if we want to have more breakout companies across the UK, as well as, because I think actually in terms of network and getting businesses to talk together, a lot of that hard work's been done by people like Stephen and Nicola and all the other people involved in the other regional hubs. But yeah, we need more money. I think that would be my
Thanks, Nick. And Ron, may I just ask, obviously there are those recommendations you did touch on in the report on the investment sort of side, and you had a great chapter, a group of people involved in that piece of work. Is there any sort of reflection you've got there on what Nick said around that capital raising that you want to build on?
Yeah, just coming off mute. Yeah, look, Nick, whether it's your business in terms of Zumo Money, or Par, yours in terms of Access Fintech, or the likes of, I don't know, Modular, which is a bigger organization, or something like Card Switcher UK, which is also on this call. I think everyone is seeking that opportunity to continue to grow the business as much as they can. So I referenced earlier that I think there is an opportunity, and I think there is an interest and an enthusiasm for some sort of growth fund that would allow an opportunity for you, Nick, in your example, to drive scale. So I think the words I've used are something like unlocking institutional capital to create a £1 million fintech growth fund of sufficient scale to basically be the catalyst in developing a world-leading ecosystem. Because UK entrepreneurs are struggling sometimes to find investment to grow their startups, or you can take it up to a certain point, to your point, but it doesn't go further than that. But the consequence of that is that people are selling out, and they'll sell out to someone who comes along and says, well, actually, let me buy this business because I can do something with it, and then it might get exported to the States or something like that. So there's, in the region of, as I said earlier, £6 trillion locked up in pension funds alone. If we can redirect some of that, that's some of the work that we're trying to do, to try and work in the background to try and do this. It's not going to be easy, Nick, and I don't want to give any false sense of security there. Don't worry about it. As soon as Santa responds with the presents, that'll be there. But I do think that there is a moment in time, and I think that moment in time is here and now, simply because of the interest that has been created in the sector, as you've all seen and you've all contributed to. So I'm hoping we can do something on the back of that. But it's that, and I call that a ladder of finance, because that's essentially the way to think about it. It isn't just a one-off thing. It's listings and these other things that we've got to do as well.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And Kate, can I just bring it, is there anything from a global point of view, and I know you've done a lot of work in other clusters, hubs around the world, that we can learn from in this, maybe on the investment or anything else in terms of taking...
I think yeah, thank you, Stephen. So over, I guess, the last 3 years, we've done various ecosystem builds in different parts of the world. On the investment point specifically, the ladder analogy is a fantastic one. It's often called pathways in other parts of the world, where that ladder or that pathway through a much cleaner funding route and mechanism, has often been the key to unlocking that growth and that scale. It's never straightforward, right? And whichever ecosystem you go to around the world, that's typically in the top 3 challenges that are talked about. But yeah, ladders, pathways, whatever you want to call them, I think are pretty critical to unlocking. I guess some of the other things that I've seen around the world that make clusters and ecosystems successful, I guess reflecting on a few of the points that I made earlier, that being really clear on what you're good at, being really clear on what you want to win at, I think is pretty much always in there. That connectivity between different groups, different constituents of an ecosystem is always there. I've spent a lot of time in Israel and Tel Aviv looking at some of how the success that Tel Aviv has had has come about, and a huge part of them as a very specific example reflects on that point about that tenacity and that resilience and that recognition that this is a challenging path. Ron talked about the sort of pioneer style of leadership here. That is absolutely a hallmark of where other locations around the world have been successful. So a few thoughts there, Stephen, I hope helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So, okay. Pa, I was just going to start. So what would most help you in terms of that next stage of your development? I know you are recruiting now, aren't you? So it's obviously a people element, but what would help Access Fintech in terms of its UK, Scotland and UK presence?
Yeah. So I want to touch on just a couple of things that were mentioned there as well, because they're quite entertaining, I think. So Kent, our co-founder, is an Israeli guy and absolutely falls into that pioneer style of rolling fintechs out. Access Fintech is actually his second pass at this as well. So he's gone through it in those kind of type 1 fintechs where it was very much about kind of trying to really revolutionize the market and drag financial institutions along with him. And now I would say we're kind of at FinTech 2.0, where it's actually more about collaboration, which is, I guess, what's just been referred to, and partnering with other organizations and other fintechs on the street as well. So I feel kind of relieved that so much of what's being discussed is kind of the journey that we're on at the moment as well. In terms of growth, we are really fortunate in that we actually closed out our Series B in August of last year. So actually in the middle of the pandemic. So I feel like that's testament to kind of where we are positioned and how we're doing at the moment. And that has allowed us to grow. So I think we went from 50 staff just before the Series B concluded to we're at 86 globally now. And obviously I've indicated how much of that growth is local. And we're intending to continue to recruit. We brought in 2 individuals actually within the last few weeks, one who's moved from London to join us here in Glasgow, and one from Berlin as well. So we're doing our bit here, I think, to make Scotland somewhere that I think historically we've seen a lot of brain drain from Scotland, right? Excellent universities, but the talent goes elsewhere. So I think what I would like to see is more to stem that tide and to keep the talent that we have in Scotland, from Scotland in Scotland. So I'm from Dundee University. I know how much technology stuff was happening around there. I joined BNP Paribas when I was up in Dundee as well. And you wouldn't necessarily know that even those financial organizations are there, much less the many, many technology companies that we're seeing. So things like tech visas to continue bringing in global talent, but doing more to promote what we're actually doing here already and the types of careers that individuals can get into. So I know Nick mentioned he's a historian. I've recruited one of those recently as well. My background's actually law, and I ended up doing the role that I'm doing. So it's kind of that cross promotion. So I remember when I was young, when I just started at BNP Paribas, I was taken back into Dundee Uni by, I think it was Scottish Financial Enterprise, to do a talk for other lawyers to encourage them to come join finance. And I kind of feel like we need to get into that same territory with fintechs. So I want to promote what we're doing to young talent, tell them that they don't need to run off to Silicon Valley. We're actually doing it right here. So kind of get involved. So tech visas and that cross-pollination and promotion, that this is a career that people can come into regardless of what they've done at university or otherwise.
Great point. Ron, obviously, again, a key part of the report recommendation on skills. You've touched on visas. Anything else from what Par has said there about that encouraging of the talent?
Yeah, I think I think you make a really important point. I was doing one of these type of calls yesterday to some parliamentarians as part of an APPG thing that they had, and one of them asked the question, what else can we do? As in, what else can they do? And I said, well, to start with, I think you can start talking about the sector a lot more, because I don't think people talk about it. They don't think about it in the same way as they think about the larger incumbent banks. But then it's about explaining that there are some real solutions that are being solved, real issues that are being solved for consumers, for small businesses, for corporates. So I think that's a big thing that we've got to do. And I think that not just the report, but many of the things that you guys are all up to, and many others up and down the country, I think you've got to start to tell your local MPs, your local stakeholders, because they said the same thing. They said, we don't hear about it. So I think it's incumbent on many of you to start telling your MPs about the businesses that you're running, so that they can actually be proud to talk about it, because they're always looking for local stories as well. Because basically the UK is a local institution. We talk about it on a national scale in London and all the rest of it, but what the heartbeat is essentially what goes on locally. So that's one thing I can readily suggest you do, because it'll be stories that they'll want to talk about in the house themselves as part and parcel of things that are going on in their own constituency. So it came straight from them, as opposed to me saying, well, what do you want me to get them to do? That was a very direct request.
Right, great. Thank you, Ron. Nicola, just changing tack slightly and going back to what Ron was sort of saying, the whole idea of CFIT really, and obviously one of the areas where I've been developing, you really got involved with the team at the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence, which was obviously formally in that terms that funding came in last summer. Is there anything where you feel actually that could contribute to the bigger what's happening for the UK across the piece there that you wanted to pull out?
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Stephen, of an initiative across Scotland that has legs that can take us nationally and really play into the opportunities that CFIT offer us. So there's a couple of specific strands there, I think, with that capability. So the Global Open Finance Centre of Excellence is that collaboration across the University of Edinburgh, FTS and FinTech Scotland. And some of those attributes, as we think about data-driven innovation, are really driving the development of this organisation and this institute. And there are a number of specific initiatives. First of all, the creation of a digital sandbox and an innovation sandbox that actually allows fintechs with access to a data asset to come and test innovation and develop innovation. So I think there's a natural connection there to some of the work that CFIT wants to do, and that we would want to demonstrate that opportunity to connect Scotland into that work. And then I think there's also an opportunity as we convene some discussions around global connectivity, and we think about those opportunities across the world, and how do we consider technical standards globally, and what does the role of an organisation associated with an academic institution, if you like, give us to help us progress those types of conversations. So there's already some really good groundwork and foundations there within GOFCO that I think we should be will absolutely strengthen us as the UK to contribute to CFIT and to complement some of the opportunity there. It'd be great to have those conversations. I'm not sure if you're on mute, Stephen.
Yeah, sorry, the postman arrived. Apologies. Rod, it's early days, obviously, as you touched on, sort of CFIT at this sort of stage, really, in terms of that sort of forming. But is there any sort of further observations you wanted to mention on that? Because obviously it does seem quite a critical thing, this bringing together the whole team.
It is important, and it's a central recommendation of the review to form this new entity, as I said, the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. And I've chosen the words quite carefully, as opposed to talking about fintech, for the reasons I talked about earlier. And it really should be the vehicle to deliver the capability and deliver solutions and provide true collaboration, because I think that's the only way this is going to work. between government, between academia, between industry and regulators. I've tried to model it on an organization which is the Green Finance Institute, which basically builds a broad coalition upstream of product development in private firms to grow the market. So that's really the goal. It's I can't say more than that, not because I don't want to, but it's just I kind of need to have the mandate to get on with it, because to the point that Nick made, it's the same issue. I need to make sure that there's some seed funding put into this thing, because if we can't have that, it's not going to go anywhere. And I'm hopeful we'll get that, but for the first 3 years, and then it becomes self-financing through initiatives and sponsorships and all the other things that it would be required to do. It is not meant to be a member organisation, because I'm not going to get government to be funding a member organisation. That's not where we're going. But this is essentially some oxygen, if I can put it that way, to drive activity at a local level as well as at a global level, and that's the objective.
Thank you, Ron. It's good to understand that sort of that context. I just wanted to say we're just coming to midday, that we actually do run till past. So and there's a good sort of chat in there. Some of it's very technical, so I'm not going to go down the technical conversation, Nick, if you don't mind. I'll let you answer those offline if that's okay. But Nick, I will come on to you in terms of, so Zumo is real. It's starting to establish a presence. I'll tell you why I say that. Even my hairdresser asked me when I could have my hair cut a few months ago about Zumo Money. He said, "Do you know Zumo Money?" And I said, "Well, what is that a key part, and what more can be done to help you in terms of build that presence?" I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're most products in our space have been kind of developed for people who are already into cryptocurrency. They're kind of down the rabbit hole type products. They're not really designed. They're almost designed to be as complex as they possibly can be. So we've tried to take the exact opposite approach. We have a very complicated technology platform underneath, but the presentation there is extremely simple. The whole idea is that somebody can pass KYC, onboard, link their bank account, and have bought their first Bitcoin in a kind of 10-minute period, and then they've got somewhere ultra secure to store it. And if they want to get rid of it, they can sell it within the app and put that money back out into their bank account all very, very quickly. So we're trying to have something which appeals to everybody and takes away a lot of the barriers around trust, usability, security that people have concerns with the space. And a key part of that has been, from a brand point of view, we've spent a lot of time and effort on the brand because, we want it to be approachable and trustworthy and friendly. And equally, we've done some stuff that I suppose would maybe be counterintuitive for an early stage startup. So I'm sure your hairdresser would probably have seen one of our massive billboards around Edinburgh and Glasgow that we ran in November last year. And I think the bus backs are still, because no one's buying any advertising, it's been the best ever, the longest ever ad buy of all time. Our bus backs are still, I still get people sending me Zumo posters from the bus backs. And we'll continue to invest in brand and in education. I think you have to in the space, because it's still one where there's a lot of legitimate concerns over it's disproportionate amount of scams. People's Elon Musk's Twitter account is still being hacked, and Bitcoin scams prevalent online, etc. So yeah, anything we can do from an education point of view to do that is helpful. But it's incredible how the understanding is permeating through to everyday people, not to the kind of the 2% of people who got into the space earlier on. It's fascinating to see it happening right in front of us.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So, Ron, I was going to come on as we start, probably just gather some views, but if you don't mind, we'll start with yourself. We're just really looking, if we put ourselves forward, whether it's 3 or 5 years, and looking in terms of what would you hope the journey we've been on and where we are. And maybe just to come back to the point you raised, and actually this word fintech and how important that is in, say, 5 years' time or.
It's a little bit like e-commerce. It's still talked about in many ways, but the reality is it's commerce, and now it's part and parcel of businesses everywhere. So I'd like to think that we'll move the needle collectively. so that we start talking about it in terms of financial services that are actually improving lives for people. That's really what this is about. But that's the only way we can judge this. I think the other side of it is that, you know, that for me, if you think about it, we've seen things like the vaccine and life sciences in the UK in terms of how much progress has been made. But so when Britain tends to invest in its potential, and this is about its potential, I think it excels on a global scale. And the vaccine and life sciences, I think, are really good examples of that. And I think that's the opportunity we've got here before us as it relates to fintech. And as I said earlier, now is the moment to seize it. If I may, Stephen, just highlight something that was talked about earlier, which is that when you look at the type of roles that are going around in terms of job adverts from UK fintechs who are scaling up, there are something like 43% of job adverts were seeking data skills, 44% were seeking technology skills, 35% were seeking business skills. So what that tells you is that's essentially the gap to be filled in terms of what we're trying to address. And you know, we've got some recommendations in which are about building a pipeline of talent by supporting high growth firms to offer work placements to further education and higher education students and to Kickstarters. Because in many ways, fintech, as I said earlier, is the future of financial services. And it's to create hundreds of thousands of jobs in the UK. So I think that's the opportunity. And in many ways, if we can find that bridge to get there, then I think we'll have a very, very thriving, successful, global sector that frankly will probably not be called fintech any longer. It'll just be the thing that we do.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I think we very much share that philosophy really, in terms of really where the journey that we're on. Ken, just what's your take really, just briefly, in terms of 5 years on? We'll still be looking young and very motivated by what's happening. But what will stand out, do you think, in 5 years' time?
Yeah, a couple of things for me, and listen, truly well said, Ron. I completely agree with those points. A couple of, I guess, builds from me, and two specific ones. So we have an opportunity here to really, I think, address some pretty significant societal challenges. And I'm talking about inclusion, I'm talking about financial education, I'm talking about leveling some of the challenges around homelessness, around parts of society that quite frankly need far more support and help. And as members of that society, it's all kind of inherent on us to do something about it and contribute with it and through it. And I think fintech has a role to play there. So that's what I want. That's what I want to see, number one. The second thing that I think is, so I absolutely hear the point about the technical skills, but I don't want us to miss the next skills gap, you know, and by that I mean the behavioral scientists, the anthropologists, the psychologists, all of whom are really, really critical to designing a future, a fintech, a broader tech future that resonates with society. So yes, we absolutely need to fill the technical skills, but we also need to fill the behavioral skills and the science and the societal reflections that will form the DNA of some of these solutions going forward, Stephen. So those are my two offerings to build on what Ron mentioned.
Thanks, Ken. Par, if you had an ask or something you would go for today, or something in the future you'd like to see in place, is there anything that stands out for you?
So for me, it is that move into kind of FinTech 2.0 and the progression into technology. So from our perspective, we're actually already starting to speak to corporates and wondering whether at what point we rebrand, because we're kind of already having those discussions, and we can see more organizations moving down that route. So it's how do we do that? How do we do that cleanly? But to the point actually that Kent's just made, in a way that makes sense for people. I mean, all of the technology that we're using, that we're rolling out to individuals and to organizations, is with a view to making life easier, better, making those processes more efficient. But you can't forget that that's people who are doing a job, and that it has to be tactile and meaningful for them and useful for them.
Yeah. Yes. Nicola, a bit probably unfair. You've only been in the job literally days and weeks as chief executive of FinTech Scotland, but where are we going to be in 5 years?
So where I think we have a real opportunity actually is around that inclusion agenda for sure, and we already have some great foundations here. I see FinTech as a real opportunity to open up access to financial services for quite a number of people, and to actually get people more engaged in financial services. I joined the world of financial services myself around 13 years ago, having come from the hospitality industry. And I remember stepping into that world as a regulator thinking, wow, it's just dense, it's opaque, it's difficult to navigate. And I think FinTech gives us that opportunity to change that journey and that perception for people as they engage with FinTech. So I absolutely see a real opportunity for us to include more people in financial services with FinTech. And I think there's a real opportunity with the work that Ron has done for us to raise some of these issues to help address some of the infrastructure and the collaborative opportunities here in front of us, so that we really create that environment that allows innovation and allows businesses to flourish. So I'd like to see more of that collaboration to drive the infrastructure to allow that to happen.
And Nick, before I come on to Ron, really, I think you share that mission as well, knowing.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, I couldn't agree more with Kent and Nicola on the inclusion piece. I think that's one of the key opportunities that we have at the moment. A couple of people have raised this whole link between digital identity, digital currencies, and the fact that actually, we could, as has been done in other places in India at the moment, pretty successfully, digital ID that's not based on an address. Suddenly you include every homeless person or people who are having to live in bed and breakfasts, temporary accommodation. There's a massive opportunity, to kind of elevate our space that we're in and kind of move away from a speculative investing space and really think about how you unleash the potential of kind of the blockchain, DLT, ID, digitalization of currency. That's what kind of gets us out of bed in the morning. So I'm very hopeful, and where I think we're uniquely positioned in the UK, but particularly in Scotland, is that we have this incredible kind of sandbox in Scotland. 5 odd million people, with quite a lot of abroad. We do have some issues with exclusion, digital exclusion, financial exclusion. And we kind of have a perfect sandbox to play in, and a lot of flexibility and option around how we might get a digital pound into people's hands directly, how we can give people access to contactless payments who currently don't have them. I think that we could have an incredible sandbox to play in, which could really help Scotland establish itself in the space. So we would advocate and do anything possible to support that, and Nicola's move on the R&I piece, and we'd love to be involved in that kind of future.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. Ron, may I just last few minutes with yourself, really, and just any reflections and in terms of the session, really, and any sort of thoughts you want to add on to summarise.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thank you for it. I think it is right, as everyone's just said, that I think FinTech is the opportunity to improve the lives of consumers, savers, citizens, and small businesses. There are already examples of technology delivering solutions, whether it's digital banking for the unbanked, in terms of you can get an app which is, no matter what your credit score is, there's a prepaid debit card which has been used by people needing an account, whether it's open banking, whether it's connected payment services, whether it's credit scores. I think the thing I would encourage everyone to do is talk about it. Make sure that you tell people about the many, many things that this sector is already doing, not just in terms of helping lives, but also creating jobs. So I'm delighted to have contributed in part to the work that all of you are doing. All I've had to do is really just pull a report together. You guys are at the coalface in terms of really driving activity, and I'm really grateful for everything you're doing. And more importantly, I think this will make a massive difference to the future of the UK. So thank you for the opportunity, Stephen.
No, thank you, Ron, and obviously a big thank you to Nick, Par, Kent, and Nicola. But a huge, I think it's far more than just pulling the report together. I don't think, you know, in terms of the impact through your leadership, your drive, through a challenging year, obviously personally, but also in many respects, really, to where we are on this, I think it provides a real step change. And that's down, when I say onto your leadership. So we're very much behind you, and to embrace that, not just here in Scotland, but as part of Team UK as well, going sort of forward. So thank you everybody for joining us. There were some great questions which we'll follow up on some of those in sort of the chat. But Ron, in particular, I know you're very much on tour at the moment on the FinTech Sector Review and the report. So we appreciate you being with us on this Friday. And hopefully at some stage we can welcome you back into Scotland, and you'll see why it's so vibrant and how the weather is so good sometimes. But thank you everybody for joining us. Really terrific conversation. Of course, we could go on all for the rest of the day, but I hope that's great food for thought. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure you have as well. And big thank you, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.